Love doing that. Let me call to order the meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission for Tuesday, February 6, 2024. And Happy New Year to everybody, because this is the first time we've met this year. Madam Secretary, could you call roll, please?
Sure. Commissioner Ahmed, Commissioner Alpert,
Here.
Commissioner Curtis,
Present.
Vice Chair Kuznick,
I'm here.
and Chair Wallace.
I'm here as well. Thank you all. Ms. Poon, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4, for those who are keeping track. This part of our meeting will be for public comment. It'll be for public comment on items other than on the agenda. So if you want to talk about the court system, the Super Bowl, or something like that, this is your opportunity. The other things you can keep till we call the other matters for call. So, Madam Recording Secretary, do we have any written statements for public comment?
No written comments, but I do have a speaker card.
Okay, let's see. Do we have anybody raising their hand? No, we're not doing that anymore. Okay, let's have our first speaker.
Bill Clarkson.
Oh, you don't want to talk about the Super Bowl? All right,
Thank
okay.
you for the clarification. There was an item on the speaker card.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay, we'll close public comment. Item number 5 is additions and revisions. We have none. Item 6 is the consent calendar. We have nothing to consent to. Item 7, approval of the minutes from the meeting on December 5, 2023. Anybody have any questions, comments, changes for the minutes? Not seeing any hands raised or heads bobbing up and down. I would be happy to entertain a motion to approve.
I will make the motion to approve the minutes of the December 5th, 2023 meeting.
Second the motion.
Okay. We'll do it the old-fashioned electronic way. Okay, the minutes from the December meeting have been approved 5-zip. Item number 8, continued items after closing a public hearing, we have none. Item number 9, continued items, open public hearing, we have none. Item 10, public hearing, new items, we have none. Item 11, non-public hearing action items, we have none. Item number 12, we have liaison and study session reports. We have actually 2 study sessions. The first is for the Avalon Bay Apartment Project, colloquially known as BR3A. We have a staff report.
Good evening. So we have the Avalon Bay Apartment Project Study Session. On January 11th, 2024, the applicant submitted a preliminary housing development application for the proposed apartment project. This is located on the Bishop Ranch 3A site, 6200 Bollinger Canyon Road within the City Walk Master Plan. The project consists of 2 apartment buildings totaling 457 units and is connected by breezeways. The northern building is 7 stories with a centralized parking structure. The southern building is 5 stories. It includes a courtyard with a pool and amenity area. Consistent with the city process for SB 330 applications, we scheduled this study session to provide an opportunity for the applicant to share their vision with the commission and the public early in the process. So at this point, I'd like to turn this over to the property owner to introduce the applicant team and offer up a few words. And I'll also try and get this logged in here real quick. So if Stephanie, if you could come up for a minute.
Don't go too far. There may be some questions for you after the applicant talks.
Good evening, Chair Wallace and Planning Commissioners. On behalf of Sunset Development, I'm Stephanie Hill. Sunset is pleased to be partnering with Avalon Bay Communities, a prominent Bay Area apartment developer, on the next community within the City Walk development. Avalon has spent the past several months refining their design and incorporating feedback from you all that they received in November on their concept design, and are excited to receive your feedback this evening. I'm going to introduce Chris from BAR, the architect for the project.
Sorry, let me log in here. So you just use the arrow keys, but let me put it in presentation mode. If I can find it. Am I missing it? Oh, no, got it.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Chris Hagelin. I'm with BAR Architects in San Francisco. Thank you for coming here tonight and listening to us describe our project here at Bishop Ranch. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about BAR Architects. So BAR's actually been involved out here in Bishop Ranch for the last 8 or 9, 10 years, I guess. So we collaborated with Renzo Piano on the City Center project. And then after that, we've been working with Sunset on the master plan for Bishop Ranch, or for this part of Bishop Ranch. And so it's really exciting when Avalon invited us to look at this building with them, and very, very happy to continue the work that we've been doing out here in San Ramon and Bishop Ranch. We're a firm of about 70 people. Our main office is in San Francisco. We have an office in LA. The firm has been around for over 50 years, and I've been around for maybe 2/3 of those years. We do a lot of multifamily housing, and just some of the projects we've done around the Bay Area, San Francisco, Dublin, and lots of different scales, lots of different sizes. Some of them are historic renovations, some are new construction, but definitely a lot of housing of this similar scale. The overall site plan that you see here, and I think everybody knows where the site is at Site 3A here, right at the edge, the eastern edge of Bishop Ranch, adjacent to the Iron Horse Trail and City Hall in the park. You can kind of see it here in the context with the likely future open space heading towards City Center to the west as well. And I'm sorry, the data, as was mentioned, this is 457 units. You can see the mix of units. It's mostly 1 and 2 bedroom units. There's a handful of studios and 3 bedroom. And then the parking ratio is approximately 1.4 spaces per unit. It's 640 spaces. So this is what we had shared with you a few months ago, back in early November. Simple white box massing models. We're beginning to think about the scale of the building and where the parking would be and how the units would break up across the site, and really broke the building into really 2 buildings that have bridges that connect it, with one of the buildings at 5-story. That's the building that's facing Bollinger Canyon, and then a 7-story building to the north of that. And that building has a garage in the middle that gets wrapped by housing. So the garage is completely hidden to anybody. It has units that kind of wrap, people call it a wrap project. And that's the 7-story portion. So here you see the same views, but now we've started to develop the architecture of the building, the aesthetics, the outside of the building. And really matching the massing that we showed you before. And a couple of big picture ideas as we thought about the site. So if you look at the view in the upper left-hand side, so that's looking from up in the air as you're kind of over the city hall and the park. So you'll see on the left-hand side, Bollinger Canyon. So we thought it would be nice to step down the building a little bit on Bollinger. We could have done something a little bit taller, but based on the program requirements and the goals of Avalon, it allows us to step that portion building down to 5 stories. And again, have the building that was a little bit further away from the street and a little bit buried back in the site to be the taller portion of the building. And then what we've been calling the fingers, the elements, the vertical elements on the right-hand side, we wanted to break the scale of the building down a little bit more as it faced Iron Horse Trail and the park. So hopefully that park and trail will be there for many, many, many years. And so it's a view that even though it's a 5- and 7-story building, we think it breaks down the scale nicely. That's a little bit more in keeping with San Ramon. If you look at the view on the lower left, that's the view facing west. So it's facing City Center. It's trying to be respectful of the City Center, which is a very simple, very horizontal building. We really wanted to pay a little bit of homage to that building. It also will ultimately be partially covered by a couple of future phase buildings that you see lightly blocked out there that will hopefully have an open space in between. And then you'll see this brown spine. So we've created this kind of strong architectural element bisecting the building, running east to west, which is our front door to the building. So as visitors or people that live here, future tenants, the lobby is along that spine, and on the ground floor is all the amenity spaces that the residents will use. And then it opens up into a courtyard on the building towards Bollinger Canyon. This is a quick study to show the massing, and then the red is massing that we could have done still following the design guidelines. The entire building could have been 7-story. We didn't have to do these notches. So we just wanted to quickly show you, we're trying to follow the guidelines, but also create a little bit of articulation of the building that we thought was appropriate for the site. This is a site plan, ground floor plan. So just again, to orient you real quickly, Bollinger Canyon on the right, the park and the city hall, page north, top of the page. So you can see that, so we have a street that wraps around the building. So you can come in, if I can point, are you able to see this cursor? Yeah. So coming in off the new traffic light here, right adjacent to the bridge, this is thought of as really being the main entry for residents and future tenants. You come in, we've canted the building back so you get a bit more of an expansive view. You can see this spine element that I mentioned to you, and the main lobby is here. There's some parking spaces here, so future renters or for an Uber driver or something, they can come in here. There's 7 or 8 spaces. Everybody knows where the front door is. There's some nice wayfinding on the site, and we think this is one of the easier ways to get into the project with this full turn signal intersection here. The 5-story portion is this building here. We're following the setbacks or exceeding them along Bollinger Canyon, or we're about 35 to 40 feet of space. So we'll continue to have the large green buffer space between Bollinger Canyon and the building. And then this building is a U shape with a little bit of a crank. Like I mentioned, the crank was there to help show the front door. And then it creates a nice outdoor garden space for the residents. So this is just for the residents. It will be private. There'll be some sort of gates along here. And it's on grade, so it's not on a podium. A lot of projects like you see like this have garages that are underground, or the pool and things are on top of that. This is all on grade. So we have a great landscape architect, Creo, who's been working on the design of this. So the pool will get some nice big trees in here, and working with Avalon on some great amenities within this central space. And then this spine that I mentioned is running here, and then this outdoor space connects the building east to west. So residents here can walk between the sites and walk down through here into a future open space. Or they can walk across this street and down to City Center. the fingers that I mentioned, you can see here. So it creates these little pieces of buildings that jet out, and then a series of really nicely scaled small outdoor spaces that would be probably for the use of the 4 or 5 apartments that are on the ground here. So a nice, something that we think that we have more 2 and 3 bedrooms in this area. So maybe families can live here. Somebody with a small child could have a small place to play. The entry into the garage is on the page left here. There's an existing garage on the left is the part of the Sunset property. And then you can see the garage with the units again that wrap around that building. And the only part of the garage that's visible is the entry, and then there's a little bit of services here, but there's units above this. So the connection to City Center, the trail, the part of the walking district here is this connection here, which we are, I think is very important, and that the team is proposing a pathway here. The existing garage, as I mentioned, is here. So we're working with Avalon and Sunset on the design of this area, but we really see this as an important connection to City Center and the rest of the site and to the trail. So we haven't drawn any specific event here, but we know the intent of the master plan and the walking district is there might be some kind of iconic sculpture or something that could be at the crossroads between these two. So that's something that we'll be kind of continuing to think about and work on with the design team. So we've got a few renderings, kind of walk you around the site. So the first view is looking from Bollinger Canyon. And on the right-hand side, we have the drawings from the Related project. So this is just a kind of a simple ghosting in of the scale of Related's building on the south side. It's a little hard to see, but you can see your new bridge here. And then this is our new proposed building on the left-hand side. Again, 5 stories. There's that big buffer. And as I mentioned, the landscape architect is looking at some really nice and interesting berming, low planting, and some trees along this parkway. Not sure exactly what Related's doing on their side, but I'm sure they're also doing something nice to enhance Bollinger Canyon.
It's a big apartment.
Pardon me?
I think it's a big apartment building.
It is a big apartment building, yes. And I mean, the massing we showed is correct. That is the massing that they have. They have some stepping of the building along that edge. It's a little bit taller than our building along Bollinger. So this is the view as you're on Bollinger. This is actually coming from the east side and turning into the project. So the entry experience here with landscaping, new trees, new sidewalk that would be pushed in away from Bollinger Canyon to create better pedestrian feel. And then, architecturally, we're trying to do a building that we think is contemporary, but not trendy, timeless, is simple. We are looking at a few different materials. We're still kind of working our way through that. Some larger windows on the corners and the entryways that create some interest and a kind of a lantern effect here. A kind of an upgraded material in this brown area that we're trying to determine what that be. And then you can see in the distance that long spine that I mentioned, which has this white frame that wraps around. And then we're taking away a couple of units in the top to create a rooftop amenity for the residents. So they'll get a nice view of Diablo and the hills to the south and to the east. And then carrying on down that street, this is the entry. This is the lobby here. The lower building on the left-hand side, the 5-story building with residential units on the grade with stoops. This is the bridge that will connect each of the levels across because everybody will park in the building on the right. And then you can see this kind of nice corner element with the outdoor space that I mentioned up on the 7th floor. And then this series, again, these series of fingers with outdoor decks looking towards Tam. Oh, excuse me, Tam. I'm sorry. I lived in Marin. Diablo, different mountain. As you're coming around the project, this would be looking from the new trail that would connect City Center to Iron Horse Trail. And you can see the building here. The garage entry is very discreet and back and through here. Front stoops all along the edge here and nice landscaping and terraces on a number of the units. And then this is back on the other side with those fingers with the this frame and terraces again with the view towards Diablo. And really a lot of wonderful landscaping that are in the plan now. And that's my presentation. Hope that is helpful. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions immediately for the applicant? Comment first. Okay, you can wait. Okay. All right, let's open up public comment on this item. Do we have any speaker cards? We do have one. Do we have any written communications? I think we had a couple.
Yes, we received written communication from Kevin Burke with East Bay for Everyone, and I do have 2 speaker cards for this item.
Okay,
Susie Ferris Intercom.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Wallace, Commissioners. I think most of you know me. I'm here to express my concerns that some of the same review and approval mistakes that were made on the Marketplace project are being made again here. First, under SB 330, the 30-day timeline is already in jeopardy. The project application was received on 1/11, and you are just now seeing it. The deadline for declaring the project non-compliant is February 11th. Second, like Marketplace, as of the writing of this staff report for Avalon, other city and external agencies, page 8, have not commented. So you are therefore without the benefit of that analysis. Third, the staff report and the H&K letter do not discuss the AIR or City Walk Master Plan compliance, which is a significant issue. City staff has written that they will make a determination if the project application has provided the required information to be deemed complete for processing. The project being deemed compliant will essentially foreclose further CEQA review. This is an issue being litigated now in the Marketplace case. Have you seen any analysis of compliance with the master plan or EIR? If I'm correct, and there is no analysis of the master plan and CEQA, the commission should direct staff to declare the project application incomplete for failing to demonstrate compliance with the master plan and CEQA, or issue a letter yourselves if you do not trust that staff will do it, as has happened in both the Golden Skate and the Marketplace projects. I thank you for your consideration.
thank you. Next speaker.
Bill Clarkson.
Good evening, Chairman Wallace, Commissioners. I had an opportunity before the meeting to talk to the applicant for a little bit about my questions around the walking district. They assured me that they'll be working with staff and also be bringing greater specificity and clarification that they will be meeting all of the minimum standards when it comes to the walking district, which is a minimum of 30 feet of space, which I appreciate that. In fact, they were quite clear and adamant that they would make sure they meet that requirement. And I appreciate hearing that. It's good news. Little things. I love the fact of moving the sidewalk away from Bollinger Canyon Road. Taking our sidewalks off of Crow Canyon and off of Bollinger Canyon and moving them away from the traffic is a great idea. A couple of us have made walks over at the Mission Bay project. I've noticed that wide sidewalks where you have lots of tall buildings and lots of pedestrians, having a sidewalk at least 10 feet wide in front of buildings is really important. We notice when we watch families and crowds walking around, when you have narrow sidewalks, it becomes very difficult, especially with strollers. So I encourage them to make sure they have plenty wide sidewalks. I like the architecture upon the first look. I think this is a complement to both Sunset and also to their different partners, bringing really good projects here to San Ramon and making sure they do it in a thoughtful way. My main concern is that we spent a lot of time as a council, a lot of time planning commissioners, a lot of time with the Parks Commission, trying to create a really robust, fun walking district. And I hope that staff and everybody else involved in the project now will really emphasize the importance of not just meeting the minimum standards, but let's create really a fun, vibrant walking district. We want these communities to be really successful. We want them to be a fun place for people to live and to enjoy their families and all the amenities. Let's not scrimp on the little stuff and enjoy that. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the applicant's willingness to work with you guys to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No other speaker cards.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Get public comments closed. Now, we go on to the question and answer session. Commissioners, do you have any questions for either the applicant or staff? I think Commissioner Alpert did.
I think the first question is just because this is a workshop, if Mr. Barr could just remind the commission and the commission, through the commission to the public, the purpose of this meeting and what the intent is of the meeting.
Sure. So stepping back probably about a year now, there were discussions about how to implement an SB 330 process to provide the public as well as the commission information about projects that are being processed through the city. And so in response to that, we created a web page where we post these preliminary housing development applications so they can be seen by the public. And in addition, we committed to holding a study session as we're doing tonight prior to the applications being deemed complete. And the completeness review under government code has absolutely nothing to do with the content of the application, the quality of design or anything. It's have they submitted the required technical documents for review. And so if they are complete, then it moves on into a determination related to whether or not it's consistent with the standards, as was mentioned by the public comment. But until that point, until it's deemed complete, the timeline and the schedule for processing does not kick into effect. And so we will be making a completeness determination within the next week or so. We also have agency comments continuing to come in. We do a referral to all the outside agencies to get comments. I would also remind the commission that the City Walk Master Plan had an EIR prepared for it. And so this project was one of the projects that was contemplated under that EIR. So we'll be looking at a technical analysis based on that document. And so once the project is deemed complete, then we will move into the design review process with the commission at that point.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Once the project is complete, it deemed completed, then is the clock starts ticking.
The Permit
And then it's
Streamlining
what,
Act goes into
6
effect.
months from there?
I believe it's 180 days, but it depends on the project type and the type of review. And there's also CEQA timelines that are in effect as well. But typically we get to a hearing process before any of those timelines come into play.
Okay.
I just wanted to go back and just clarify. The project has not been analyzed for compliance to the standards, which is why we don't see it in the staff report tonight. Is that correct?
This is informational only. No action is being requested. The whole point of this exercise is to give the commission an early look at projects that they will be looking at for a technical review in the not too distant future. We're not in a position to provide a critique of code compliance at this meeting.
Thank you.
Good.
I'm, pardon me. A question about how the project interfaces with what will be the Iron Horse pedestrian bridge. Because what I've seen in the documents, it's really difficult to tell, but that is causing me some interest, or I'm just trying to visualize how that's how that fits next to the project, or how that part of it.
Okay.
So I guess maybe it's as in the form of a question. If we're going to see this again, is it possible to see how that might shake out?
I take it to mean you'd like clarification on the relationship between the Iron Horse Trail and the project. And that's something that we can address in a
Yeah.
future staff.
Yeah, it's specifically where the overpass is going to meet what is the existing trail, and how that is going to interface with this project. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Better articulated than what I said. Thank you.
Any, Commissioner Curtis?
I have something for the applicant as well, so.
Okay, we're gonna pick on Mr. Barr for a while. I have some questions.
Sure.
The first question I have is whether this project is subject to the provisions of new government code section 65913.4, which provides for ministerial approval of certain types of multifamily housing projects.
Upon initial review, it is not a by right project. It
Okay.
is subject to a development plan application.
Okay. Second question. Okay, the staff report indicates that a preliminary application was filed January 11th. A member of the public mentioned that. Is there a timeline that is associated with that filing?
Typically, the preliminary housing development application, once accepted as being complete, which is basically if they meet the checklist items, you deem it complete basically upon submittal. Within 180 days, they are required to file formal applications. In this case, they filed the preliminary housing development application and the development applications concurrently. So the preliminary housing development application establishes a vesting date for the project. I would also add that this project is subject to the development agreements for the City Walk Master Plan.
Okay. So the impact of the preliminary application basically is to freeze in place city standards, including fees that existed at the time the application was filed.
Correct. And then it also makes it clear as to the process that we're going through in terms of timelines.
Okay, now a formal application has also been filed on January 11th. Now, what type of time frames are associated with that development? I assume the first one is when staff determines that the formal application is complete.
Correct.
And how long do you have to make that determination?
30 days from its submittal.
Okay,
So
so
next
you
week.
have to determine whether the formal application is complete by next Monday.
Correct.
Basically, okay. All right. So let's assume hypothetically that it is complete. What are the milestones or triggers that have to be met thereafter?
Well, I mean, we'll be looking at it from a standpoint of if we have all the technical documents we need, we are going to be reviewing it for compliance with the development standards. We'll raise any issues that come. In this particular case, we are going to Architectural Review Board as part of the review process. Then once we get past that, it will go to the Planning Commission for review. As part of that analysis, we will also be looking at confirming the CEQA determination, whether an additional CEQA document's required or whether it's covered under the prior EIR. And so we'll make a determination regarding that process too. Each of those things have timelines associated with them, depending on which course of action you take. So it'll be subject to the outcome of the technical analysis, which again has not occurred yet because we're looking at purely completeness issues.
Right. So let's assume hypothetically that the formal application is deemed complete, say next Monday, February 12th. Is there a time limit within which the city has to advise the applicant whether the project is consistent with objective city standards pursuant to SB 330?
There is the, I believe it's either 30 or 45 days in which we have to provide them notification that as to whether it's consistent.
Depending on the size of the project.
Correct. If it's actually, excuse me, over 150 units, it's a longer time frame.
Right. I think that's the 45-day time limit.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So assuming that the application is deemed complete on Monday, then basically the city has about 45 days to determine whether it's compliant with city standards, which I assume would include the city walk master plan as well as the walking district plan and the development agreement?
We will be reviewing it against objective standards under SB 330. We are also going to be looking at it from the standpoint of consistency with those other documents. However, if they're not objective standards in the design guidelines, it's a voluntary compliance as opposed to an enforceable standard.
Right, and I understand that if you're gonna do something, it has to be a quote objective, close quote standard. I understand that. Next question. One of the issues that came up, nobody's talked about yet, is the parking situation, which I will get to the applicant on. And here's my question. It is my understanding from the way that the applicant's letter was phrased as well as the staff report that the applicant had not actually filed an application under the state bonus density law. Is that correct?
No, they're asserting density bonus.
I'm sorry?
They have the ability to file for density bonus for parking reductions. There's a different standard that relates to the required parking. Let me back up. Density bonus requirements allow concessions and waivers. And there is a discussion of a concession and waiver to lower it. But in addition, there's state standards that relate to what you can require for housing projects under density bonus. And so it has its own set of parking standards that are applicable.
No, I understand that. That's what I was trying to get to in my clumsy way. But let's answer my first question first, which is the applicant has not filed an application for the density bonus.
It's in part of their application. It is.
They said they had filed a notice of intent,
Okay.
but that there's a difference between notice of intent and actually doing it. So let me finish. So here's my question under the density bonus law. Density bonus law is triggered, is it not, by a required percentage of low-income units basically for the project?
Correct.
And then the state density bonus law, I believe the trigger is at 10%, whereas the applicant is at 15%.
There's a breakdown of the type of affordable units.
Right.
And so 5% very low income meets the requirement.
Right. As I understand the application, it's 7.5% very low and 7.5% low income. That's how you get the 15% of the units are all lower income, no moderate. Okay. Now, here's my question. Well, since they meet the requirements for getting a density bonus, even though they said they're not going to ask for one, does the fact that they have 50% of the units set aside for low income housing automatically trigger the limitations on housing that can be required that's found in the density bonus law, which in this case is significantly less than what the city requires? In other words, they said, we don't want a density bonus, but can they still, under the density bonus law, say, we should not be required to meet the city standards for the number of parking spaces because we meet the requirements in the density bonus law?
That might be a question for the attorneys when we get into the technical analysis, but I believe they could assert their rights under density bonus and there would be no harm to their application to do that. And so, again, it's something that we'll look at in the technical analysis, but state law is pretty clear on what the standards are. It's a difference between essentially guest parking and our standards is the major difference here. But I don't want to get into the technical analysis because we haven't really done it. I don't want to suggest something that hasn't been verified.
No, I understand that. I'm not asking you to run the numbers for me. I'm just trying to get the ground rules set out. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, because this project meets the requirements of the density bonus law, they can take advantage of the parking requirement aspects of that law, even if they don't ask for the additional units that the law would then entitle them to.
That is correct.
Okay.
And it's been common practice on many projects through the city.
Okay, I don't think I have any questions for you, but don't go too far.
Well,
Can I just ask one follow-up question?
Sure.
Just to clarify, you did tell us that it will go through ARB.
Mhm.
And then should we assume that ARB will count as one of their allowed 5 public hearings?
Yes, it
Just
will.
to clarify. So by the time ARB is done, there'll be 4 left. And of course, we always reserve the last one for city council.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Lord, one more question I had. So is there a, on the website of our city website, is there a place that sort of gives us the timeline of a project that has to go through SB 330? Like these are the deadlines. So it's clear to the public and clear to us also. When the deadlines are met, what are the different, thresholds here?
There's information. I don't believe our housing site page actually has a specific timeline for that. It does talk about when determinations are need to be made, but I don't think we have like a flow chart or anything like that currently.
Would you consider that
We
for
can
the
take it under
public
advisement.
especially?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to chime in on Commissioner Ahmed's request. I would agree with that. Second question, since you're still up here. At most of our meetings, we have overhead displays that the public can see, we can see. Most of the time, the majority of the slides are produced by staff. My question is there a means by which a commissioner can pull up on his or her own the particular page of the staff report that they are interested in, and then ask questions based on that particular page, as opposed to having someone go through it from the dais or the lectern, excuse me.
Are you talking about having the PowerPoint in advance? Is that the issue? Or are you talking about being able to view the agenda on your Surface?
Neither. It's actually, let me give you an example. I want to ask a question on packet page 22. Is there a way for me to be able to pull it up so that it can be displayed on the overheads, so that when I ask the witness, can you take a look at packet 22, in the middle of the page, there's a sentence that reads XYZ. What does that really mean? Is there a way to do that?
Well, I'm not sure who you refer to as witness, but in any case,
The person who's talking to the commission.
I would talk with our IT people about the capability of doing that. I don't know
Okay.
the system well,
Fair enough. That's,
but we clearly could bring it up here and present it that way.
no, I understand. We've gone through that, which is why I brought it up here, is that at least some of us are used to controlling our own paper flow and asking questions based on what we can point to. And so that's why I brought it up. Who at the IT department should I talk to?
Oh, we'll raise the issue for you.
Okay, just make sure you give Commissioner Ahmed and my name.
Why? Because you're lawyers.
No. All right, any more questions for Mr. Barr? Okay, would the applicant like to come up? Because I think at least one of us had questions for the applicant. Or anybody. I mean, the architect was given the talk. If you want to come up together, that's okay. Because I'm not sure what questions are.
I just had a quick question. I remember last time you were here and we had this presentation, there was talk about the front side of the building facing Bollinger Canyon just being a large wall. And same with the other side of Bollinger Canyon. We'll also have these large walls as dictated in the diagram here with a car going the wrong way of the street. But is there, I think the conversation back then was, is there a way to make that part of the wall more appealing, since that's where most people are going to see it, is on Bollinger? Although I do understand the fingers are facing the Iron Horse Trail and things of that nature, but more people would be seeing the front side of that building off of Bollinger than the side part of that building from the Iron Horse Trail. And I'm just trying to think if that's going to be a massive corridor of just 2 large buildings on either side. And I think that was a part of the conversation we had last time, and I just don't recognize any changes, and maybe there was, and maybe you could point to that.
So we did spend a lot of time specifically on this. Let's see, this. Oh, yeah, sorry. So this, again, this is the view as you're driving into the project from Bollinger Canyon. I mean, this is as if you were coming from the east and making a right turn. So we looked at a lot of options for this corner. To us, it's important. We had versions that stepped down, stepped up, and ultimately we decided that something that had kind of an enhanced material and large windows and this frame that created a cap or a cornice to the building and kind of a bottom to the building that separated the base on the ground floor was a nice way to and do something simple that wasn't too fussy. So, and you can see that as you move to the left, the building does step down. And then as you move, let me see, oops, apologize. A little difficult to see, but on the lower left-hand side, there is that extent of Bollinger Canyon. So there's as you're driving along here, you couldn't see it in that view because you're only seeing maybe a half of the building, but we have this same frame element that steps the building down from, gives the sense of a building that has some variety of height from this 4-story frame. There's terraces on the corner. This building runs along for maybe 70 feet. It has a different color. There's a notch there where the building steps back, where there's a stair. And then this new building begins, and then this frame element begins with terraces and large windows. So as you move along the building here, there's really 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5 different things that are happening in the architecture. The height of the building is consistent, but we have, by creating the frame and some changes in plan and material, we feel like there's enough going on over the course of the building there to, again, we're trying to strike this balance between something that I see as too fussy. There's often a kind of a reaction to try to make everything look like it's 50 little tiny buildings, and I can appreciate where that's coming from, but Bollinger Canyon is a very large and very wide street, so we think it's appropriate to do something that has some articulation without going kind of what we might consider a little bit too far. So we felt like we tried to address that, Commissioner Curtis. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. That's why I was asking, because I know that was part of the conversation. So I'm glad that you were able to provide some of the details of what has changed, because I know that was a concern along with the parking. Then my other question is, when I look at these drawings, like the word Avalon, and I know that is the name is like plastered on the front side, the back side. It's got a big in front of the driveway as well. Is that the same as every Avalon structure that you guys build, that you have that much advertising on?
We certainly want signage.
Of
You know,
course.
we want people to know where they're going. I don't know. I don't remember if we have dug deep into the signage requirements or, signage restrictions of the city of San Ramon. So we're going to have to do that if we haven't already. And I think we need the redundancy that we have as shown in the drawings? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally right next to each other, so that's why I was asking.
Yeah. Yes, I hear where you're coming from. And
Yeah.
I mean, we do want, clear wayfinding is important,
course.
and not just for, the brand name, but for everything. We want people to know how to get to city center, how to get to the park, but
Yeah.
yes, it should be thoughtful wayfinding, but not
Right.
just everywhere.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
A clarifying question. I think you said that there's the main entrance will be off of Bollinger, kind of right at that. So that will be a 4-way stop, so you can turn left, turn right into the project. Is that right? Then I don't know, and I don't know if it's tonight or maybe comes back. In relationship to the existing traffic light at BR1, is it the same traffic light that's there today or will be the entrance into the BR1? So if we can maybe have some better appreciation for where that lives compared to the entrance into this project, that would be helpful, I think. I can't visualize where it is in relationship to the
are
entrance.
you referring to the one at Bishop?
The one
Bishop
across the street,
Drive
I
with
think
the
there's an
white mirror?
entrance exit over there. Yeah. Mhm. Is that the,
Yes, so they will line up. There'll be a new intersection here.
Oh, okay.
that lines up.
Okay.
It's, kind of along that western edge of First Street.
and I assume part of the technical review includes the traffic engineer and everything on the kind of signal and all that kind of stuff. So that's not for us tonight, obviously. And then just to clarify, I think I heard this, the sidewalk along Bollinger, it'll be street, some landscape, some sidewalk, and then some landscape in that kind of order, or as opposed to sidewalk right next to the street. Is that what I heard tonight?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
so you can see the plan here. I mean, we're still working on the exact dimensions, but we do think it's important to bring the sidewalk off the street. It makes
No.
the pedestrian
Mhm.
feel a lot safer.
That's fair. And then this might be more of a staff question. I think We heard the technical review will look at this project against a lot of different plans and documents, you know, and of course we'll call out just the objective design ones that we must, but the ones that are not objective are sort of voluntary. That's kind of my understanding of the process. And then, of course, that would include walking district and development agreements and zoning codes and city walk master plans. And I'm going to guess I don't know if there is, but there's also probably to Commissioner Curtis's comment, there's, I think, a sign plan for Bishop Ranch, I think, you know, but all that stuff gets taken care of in our next phase. Is that right? Am I understanding correctly? Okay, that's good. That's good. And then, I think that's it on my questions for clarifying. Thank you.
I have a question. So if we could go back to these two. I think this is why Commissioner Wallace was talking about, could we have access to manipulating the slides? My understanding is that this is at least demonstrative of your main entrance that will be parallel to the Iron Horse. Is that okay?
Correct.
Okay. So at the bottom photograph where you see the guest parking, the entrance in, as I understand your description, it doesn't quite show the Iron Horse. Do you anticipate some sort of fencing between your property and the Iron Horse? Because I think that human beings, who they are, would create a unattractive little cutoff from the Iron Horse through your property across. And so I'm just wondering, it doesn't show any fencing. Do you anticipate something that separates your property from the rest of the Iron Horse?
So the bridge that kind of touches down and hits
Right.
grade, kind of right in this area somewhere. So everything from there on is, you know, an elevated bridge. So if you were standing on this road, I believe it's a retaining wall. So you would see there's a wall that would go from zero and start to climb
Okay.
up. The portion that's on Avalon's property is maybe half of the space between the curb and the walkway, the trail. So there's I don't know, it's approximately a 10-foot zone that's on our property that we will be landscaping. We are not planning on putting a sidewalk here. The sidewalk would be against the building because to your point, there's nowhere to go. You can't get to the bridge or the trail because it's elevated.
Okay.
And then we would wait until we got, we've talked about maybe there might be a little bit of a cut through
Okay.
in through here, but otherwise we would try to direct most people to come to this intersection and come onto the trail here. So
And
there's about 20 feet between our curb and the trail. And again, about half of it would be landscaped, I guess by the city.
Well, and this is all, there are multiple agencies that own strips of land in between
Yes.
there. And so this is something that we and Sunset, I know, are working on, are going to continue working on. I would just love to know so I just couldn't tell from your question, would you prefer to have a fence or would you prefer to not have a fence? Like, I think this is all great feedback for us as we're sorting this out.
no, and this goes back to my question about the next time trying to get a clearer sense of how the interface of the pedestrian bridge coming down at your property, because I guess in my mind, as the bridge goes up, there's land underneath it, and what's happening there or not? I don't know. So you'll get back to me on that one.
Yeah, I believe it's a solid wall, so there is no
Okay.
no place
Oh,
for somebody
okay.
to go.
I guess
Not
I
until
guess
you
I
get
need to
the-
review the bridge
to the
better.
sidewalk in the street on Bollinger.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about the fencing. What do they call it? Steel tubular fencing. I just know I used to be a high school teacher. Kids like to cut through. Okay. It might be something that as we're going forward, if we knew ahead of time, we could, rather than you going like, dang, we should have put a fence here. So,
Well, maybe Greg Abbott could give us a few extra rolls,
thank you. Thank you.
So I have a couple of just clarifying questions. So, BR3A LLC is owned by Sunset, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's the okay. And Avalon Bay Communities is what, like a partner in this thing or?
And we're a private company. We are, yeah, we're hoping to purchase the site from Sunset.
From who? From Sunset?
Yeah, that's correct.
Got it. And is your property gonna look like the one on 680 when you're going, 580 when you're going towards 580 West with Avalon?
The new one?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's, we have properties, that one's just newly opening up right next to West Dublin BART Station.
mm-hmm.
We have some older buildings that are 10 or so years old at the Dublin Pleasanton BART Station as well.
Okay, but is it gonna resemble that one? Or is it sort of, I've just seen Avalon.
Not really.
Okay.
You know, that where that Avalon sign is on an exposed edge of a garage.
Hmm,
You know, this building has a very small, like that's a much bigger exposed edge of the garage.
okay,
So, I mean, you know, it's an apartment building, but it's not necessarily, you know, different architects, different design.
okay. So I'll concede that I don't understand the whole state density bonus law. I'm a bit more novice and newer to the planning commission. But if I read it correctly, the parking situation is like this, that for one bedroom, even for 2 and 3, is 1.40 parking spot for every apartment. Is that correct?
You know, I don't have it memorized. You know, I know there's a state.
I just saw the number 1.40.
Could be. Oh,
That's
so
what-
yeah, the number that's proposed is about 1.4. That's correct.
Okay, so how do we envision that if a 3-bedroom place with a family and this teenager who drives the car and and parents drive the car, how are they going to park? Like, how are they gonna put 2 cars? Just curious, I know it's very early on, I just wanna,
Yeah, no, I mean, so we had a long conversation, I think, last time we were
Yeah,
here
I'm just-
about
yeah.
parking. You know, I think we're taking that feedback to heart and, you know,
Okay.
every project that anybody is submitting now in the Bay Area or in California is submitting with SB 330 with density bonus. But, you know, we put a letter in the packet to say, look, we want to work with you. We want to come to something that everyone here is comfortable with. In really all aspects of the project. And I know parking is going to be one of those that we need to work on. Within this packet, we've submitted a parking study, which we said we would do. So that data is there. We are looking forward to getting feedback from staff, from Architectural Review Board, and from you all. So yeah, we're very comfortable that the ratio is the right ratio for what the demands of this building will be. And it's either equivalent to or more than the usage that we see in the existing buildings we have in the area, in the state.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're comfortable that it will work. But again, we're open to that feedback and we're ready to have that conversation.
and remind me, where would the overflow parking go? I can't remember exactly. Where is the overflow parking for guests and for someone having 2 cars or 3 cars? Is there around,
Well, so you know, the 1.4 ratio would allow for more than one space per unit. But yes, there is some amount of street parking around the perimeter of the site. It's 20 something spaces.
Yeah.
okay,
Can I just ask one more question? So in between the two buildings, I know there's the breezeways that go across, and then there's a path that cuts. Is that path open to everyone, or is that going to be gated off?
Yeah, we don't have the details of how the gate will work, but there will be some sort of gate.
So so everyone with that is going from city center to the Iron Horse will have to go around the buildings as opposed to just through the building, right? Like they won't be using that breezeway in between the two buildings to get to the Iron Horse.
No, not unless you're a resident. So
Okay.
I think that the intent is people would make it over to Iron Horse Trail. Or excuse me, to this, the part of the city walk.
So they'd
extension
either go
here.
to the left over there or they'd be down on the sidewalk and on the other side.
Yeah, we've created, I mean, this is something that we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the parcels to the
Right.
west, but right now the thought is it would be 2 buildings with open space in between. I don't know for sure if that's how things will land, but so we've set it up for if that were to happen, that our residents could very easily make it into that space. Now, there is not a way to walk across Bishop there, so it's it's got a median. Camino Roma, is
Right.
it not? Yeah, Camino Roma, I'm sorry, Bishop,
Yeah.
yeah. So a pedestrian, I mean, they can jaywalk, but it's, the intent is people would make it to the signalized intersection over here to the
Okay.
left.
I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
I had a couple questions. With respect to the last one, that Commissioner Curtis brought up, you're correct that there is no legitimate way to get from city center to the pathway between the two buildings. You're either going to go down to Bollinger or up to the extension of Bishop Drive currently. And of course, the two lots that are next to you that are between you and City Center are scheduled to be built out for apartments and or a hotel. So, I mean, it's conceivable that as part of that project, they may want to put a walkway to City Center, but we haven't seen that yet. So that's just a hypothetical. Let me follow up a little bit on Commissioner Ahmed's hypothetical as well. I know you've done parking studies. I know you've thought about the fact that compared to our city standards, you're underparked. And the question I'm not sure I heard an answer to tonight is, if you're wrong, that you don't have adequate parking on site for guests and or residents, where are the people who can't park on site most likely to park, and do they have a right to do that? I think at one of the meetings, it was suggested they go over to the city center parking garage, but I don't know if that's a feasible alternative, or of course, there's a parking garage right behind your development. As of this time, do you have any rights to have people that are renting from your apartment or visiting your apartments use either facility?
As of this time, no. I mean, I think those are things that could be discussed, but yeah, we haven't made an arrangement to do that.
Right. I understand that, that to some extent that the law says, well, people have to live with the consequences of the decisions they've made, but if the decisions turn out to be wrong, you're not going to get the blowback we are. So I'd like to know, before we get much farther, if there is underparking, if there is truly underparking, despite all your best efforts, where do you see those people going to? Because as you know, we've had situations in San Ramon in the past where buildings have been underparked, and the next neighborhood is constantly complaining about it. One across the street from me is what like that. So I don't expect you to give an answer tonight unless you have one, but I just want you to know that that's something that I think all of us here would like to hear about.
And the one thing I would say is we are very sensitive to that as well. We're some apartment developers are building to sell the apartment to a long-term owner. We are the long-term owner, so we're
Okay.
building for our own portfolio. And we manage these buildings with our own staff. So the blowback for any problem, the first blowback comes to the folks in the leasing office who are our Avalon Bay employees. And so, you hear about it after 2 or 3 rounds with those folks generally. And so, we're very sensitive. We want folks to want to move in. We want folks to want to stay, renew their leases. And so it is, parking is one of the myriad of issues that affects people's daily life, affects their enjoyment of living in an apartment building. And we, feel very strongly that it's something that we need to get right for our own business purposes, let alone the impact on the broader community. So we, I think we're eager to get feedback from staff on the parking ratios and from ARB and from you all. And we're confident we can come up with something that's going to work.
Okay. On our packet, page 22, there's a reference that says that there are common outdoor areas on each level. I'm not sure what is referred to. Now, this is the packet that you guys put together, not staff. And I would pull it up and show you, but I can't do that.
If only. Do you have a page number? Because
Page 20 packet,
that is
it's-
that is not true. So there is not some sort of common community space on every floor. So there is one on, as I mentioned, on the 7th floor, on the kind of prow element looking
Yeah.
towards Diablo, and on the ground level.
Okay. When I first read that, I thought you were referring to the bridges between the two buildings, but I thought that probably wouldn't be considered a common area unless you put a McDonald's or Burger King there, which somehow wasn't in the report. Question.
Waiting for the ARB for that one.
We'll make a note to him. Maybe you can put an English pub up there. Okay. Question. The building in the back is 7 stories. The building in the front is 5. So there's going to be 2 levels of apartments that are going to overlook the top of the 5-story building, the one that's immediately adjacent to Bollinger. What's going to be on top of that 5-story building? Is you going to put your HVAC stuff up there?
Yes, likely.
and be screened from the adjacent building somehow?
Yes, likely. I mean, that is the sort of detail we haven't gotten into, but generally that is the case. But haven't sorted that out with the team yet.
Okay, I guarantee it'll come up, so,
Yeah, I mean, I think again, Avalon's it's in their best interest. They want to make sure the residents aren't looking at
Okay.
something that's too unattractive.
all right. I did want to follow up on a comment that Commissioner Curtis made, and that has to do with the size of the buildings. Now, he brought up the facing a Bollinger, and that you had the fingers facing City Hall, and which should also be City Park, although to some extent it'd be blocked off by the Iron Horse Trail Bridge. But as he pointed out, the area that's immediately adjacent to Bollinger on the 5-story building does not show much, if any, articulation. I know you said there's a lantern effect on the windows, but it also, from what I've been able to see, the area that directly faces city center on both the 5 and the 7-story building seems to lack any significant articulation. They are just long, flat buildings. Now, maybe that's because of the size of the drawings that we were given, but are you thinking about adding some articulation to the side of the buildings that face city center, which would be west facing?
So there's the view, the right-hand side of this view would be the side facing west towards city center.
Yeah.
So we have, again, broken it into 1, 2, 3, 4, a gap, 5, there's another kind of 6 or 7 elements along there. So we are trying to address that. There's a little bit of articulation on the roof. Some units have decks, some don't. There's some color and material change. There's a 2-story base that runs on the building. So we feel like we have adequately addressed the amount of articulation that we think is appropriate along that facade.
So in terms of where you think you are in terms of the ultimate design of the buildings, how far along are you? Can you give me a percentage, like we're 90% there?
I would say we're pretty far along. I mean, we're looking forward to feedback from the Architectural Review Board, but we're in kind of a schematic design phase, so there's still room to think
Okay.
about things.
Okay, all right, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. I didn't have any other questions for the applicant. Anybody else have some further questions? Well, I thank you for coming in here. I am sure we're going to see you again. You'll, of course, get a warm welcome as usual.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, that concludes that particular item, our study session, which is 12.1. Our next is also another study session. This has to do with one of our favorite subjects, objective design standards, the way of the future. So I think we have a staff report.
Hello and good evening. Let me just take a moment to pull up my presentation here. Okay. All right. So pleased to be here this evening to continue our conversation on objective design and development standards. Just a brief history as to how and what we've done since last year. As you will recall, in December 2023, we adopted the general plan 2040, along with the zoning ordinance associated with implementation of the general plan, along with some specific plan amendments and map changes. And so we are now moving into our next phase of our project. a number of different elements that we've identified that would constitute our entire project, included housing element certification, which is done, general plan adoption, which is done, and then updating some portions of the zoning ordinance associated with the general plan, which we've done. And then now moving into objective design and development standards, along with climate action plan to follow for our next couple of projects in the city. And so we thought it would be a good opportunity now that those first couple of phases of the project have been completed to bring to you just a reintroduction of the objective design and development standards. As you can see in the staff report, there's a number of different state government code sections that compel the city to develop and adopt these standards, and that allows the city the ability, when we are reviewing housing developments, to review those projects against standards that we've all agreed to abide by. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the city's consultant that is working with us to complete the objective design standards. Minterra Harnish's team worked with us on the general plan update and the earlier phases of this project, and will continue to assist us with the development of these ultimately standalone guidelines, standalone standards that will then be used for us to basically use as a checklist when we're reviewing our projects against them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Gibbons with or Brent, both Michael and Brent with Minterra Harnish.
Well, good evening. Good evening, Chair. The what? Good evening, Chair, Commission. Good to be here tonight. Last time we were with you was when we were in the thick of the general plan and housing element, and we're beyond that now. Those are adopted, and now we're going into the implementation phase, as Cindy had explained. So now we're going to jump into objective design and development standards. This is not the first time you've heard of this. This was brought forward at the beginning of last year and then was put on hold to make sure that we can meet the statutory requirements of your housing element and get that through in time to meet HCD certification. So think of tonight as just a refresher. We're going back. I'm going to walk through what objective design standards are. As a planning commission, I assume you all are very familiar with this, but we're just going to take another shot at this. As we walk through this as well, I'm going to go through some of your existing city plans, planning documents, just to give a few examples of the difference between subjective and objective language, and to highlight some areas that the city currently has subjective standards that would not meet the current push that the state's having for objectivity as it relates to design and development. And then we'll conclude this presentation. Michael will walk through some of the original draft standards that were prepared as they relate to mixed use. And that's really just a starting point. There is no actionary item for the commission tonight. This is just a reintroduction, and this is the first of several meetings where we'll bring back actually draft standards for the commission to react to and provide further feedback as we move through this process. So at a fundamental level, what are objective standards? I like to think of this as there's no personal or subjective involvement when reviewing the criteria for design and development of a project. When you think of objective standards, they need to be quantifiable, referenceable. One of the best ways you can think of a subjective standard is when you talk about a project meets the essence of a community. Well, what is the essence of a community? It's not quantifiable. And typically projects were, in the past, evaluated based on guidelines that were not black and white. They were vague and they were gray. And through this process, historically, projects were held up across the state as it related to housing and did not allow these projects to move forward. They were stalled. So the state over the last 10 to 20 years has moved in the direction of objectivity. And this is meant to streamline housing development based on the housing crisis we're currently in. That is in perpetuity, it seems like. And as part of this effort, aligned with the Housing Accountability Act, SB 35, which outlines objective standards, the state is looking for communities to identify objective, quantifiable design and development standards that meet the expectations of each individual community, so that when a project comes forward, if they meet those objective design standards, it proceeds forward through the process ministerially by right. Doesn't require any discretion at that point. And the objective standards are meant to make sure that the projects coming forward meet what the community is envisioning as part of that process. What happens is communities that don't have objective standards, there is no basis for an evaluation when a project comes forward. So if there are no objective standards within a community, there is nothing for a commission, an architectural review board to evaluate, and the project can move forward if it meets a specific criteria that the state outlines as part of a project that qualifies. So it's important to have these objective standards. And as part of this process, we want to make sure that these are in place for the city and that they meet the expectations of the community. So when projects come forward, and they're done ministerially, it's not a surprise of what's being developed, because these have already been vetted, not only by your planning staff, the architectural review board, your planning commission, and then eventually up to your city council. So how do you address objective standards? Typically, this is done through your zoning regulations. Now, zoning itself, cross your fingers, should be objective. That's the intent. It's an ordinance. It's codified. But as part of this, what we do is we look back through your zoning regulations to ensure that the standards that are currently in there, whether they are related to site development or whether they're related to design, are objective, and that they meet the criteria outlined in the Housing Accountability Act. What we do through this process is we look back at past practice that the city has done. So when we think of objective standards, it's not tossing out everything that the city's done previously. We evaluate what's been successful, what the community has already weighed in on, and what's already been vetted and accepted by the community here in San Ramon. So what we typically do is look at existing plans that have subjective guidelines, identify where those guidelines could be converted to objective standards, look through your typical conditions of approval on projects. There may be something that the Planning Commission routinely recommends as a condition of approval that is a unspoken expectation for projects. Well, that's something that if that's carried through a majority of projects and the commission feels that that is a necessary requirement that should be of all projects, whether it's a circulation point, whether it's access to recreation or amenities, that we make that an objective standard that's required of every project if it's something that's routinely put forward as a condition of approval. And then we look at your existing design guidelines and earmark those that can be quantifiable and converted into design standards. So it's a multifaceted process. So I talked at the beginning that we have design and development standards, two different things. So I want to just make the distinguishment between those. So objective development standards, the city already has. It's in your zoning. It's your height. Your height is objective. A building shall be 35 feet. Not a building should be 35 feet. You have setbacks on your property lines. You have step backs on upper stories, floor area ratio. Parking standards are objective. You shall have one space for one bedroom, so forth, just as an example. Landscaping standard percentages, those are quantifiable. So those are already covered as already listed within your zoning and your municipal code. What we're really honing on here is looking at the design portion. And design has to do everything with site design, structure design, on-site circulation design, looking at the massing of buildings, articulation, fenestration, that has to do with your openings, so your doors and windows. Objective standards can also cover color, facade materials, roof line, pitch, and so forth. So this list here is not exhaustive. It's just an example of what objective standards can cover from a design perspective. And this is what we're looking to implement as part of a proposed set of objective standards for the city's evaluation moving forward as part of this process. So I just have some examples. I know this isn't the prettiest building. I understand this building is probably 40 or 50 years old, outdates me, but I just wanted to show an example of what we're looking to not have. This building here has very little articulation, very little street presence, its use of blank walls. That is something that can be solved through objective standards. You can require that buildings include more articulation, more street activation, a more inviting street presence. You can require that buildings have a more uniform, consistent, uniform use of materials, consistency of materials, and that's something that's not necessarily represented in this example here. Same with this one. Again, an older building, you don't really see this style development anymore, but it's just to show an example of where a building is lacking in critical design elements that obviously would not meet most contemporary design standards for projects that would come forward. Again, here, zero articulation on this building. Use of materials could be consistent, but there obviously is some design lack as part of this. This example here, a bit industrial, but I think it's a great example of a building that includes a lot of different design elements, again, that can be covered through a set of comprehensive objective standards. And what I want to show here too is you have articulation on the front, you have varying materials, you have different screening techniques of circulation and access points. There is common areas, not only for individual units, but for the project as a whole. This also includes other circulation elements, including a parking structure, other on-site amenities on the bottom floor, landscaping, and so forth. So this building holistically includes a lot of different design components that could be covered under objective standards as part of a project. I do want to point out too that objective standards, that's one route when a project goes forward for approval. It does not necessarily mean that a project can't come in and provide something that's different or propose something that's different beyond what the objective standards are. But projects that do not meet the objective standards outlined by the community then have to go through a discretionary process. So it does not close the door to further creativity. It does not limit architectural excellence of buildings. All it does is sets a base minimum expectation for development that San Ramon expects coming in, and what you as the Planning Commission would expect as you've reviewed projects in the past moving forward, as well as the City Council and overall the community. What I wanted to do was now shift gears a little bit from that an educational standpoint on objective standards and why we're really here, and look at some of your existing city documents and highlight areas where there are subjective, there is the use of subjective language that cannot be used as evaluation criteria. And this was brought up actually in the last working session of this evening, where there were objective standards and then there was subjective design guidelines, which would be voluntary. And this is kind of what I'm starting to point out here. These could not be used as requirements as they stand now. What we've done is we've highlighted words in here, specifically under the RC zone, which are subjective. The word encouraged, the word suitable. What is suitable? It's not quantifiable. Encourage is not a requirement. Adequate shape and size, that's under letter B. What is the determinant that makes it adequate? 5 by 6, 10 by 8? You need to have something that's measurable and quantifiable moving forward. It's not uncommon in objective standards to have a sliding scale. A sliding scale can also be objective. Could be between 10 and 15%. That is an objective set of criteria. But I just wanted to point out here that there is language within existing plans, and these again are vetted by the community. These went through lots of community engagement processes, through architectural review, through Planning Commission and Council, but they are subjective in nature and couldn't be used as a requirement evaluation criteria. But there is the ability to look through your existing plans, extract the subjective design guidelines, and convert them and make them quantifiable where appropriate. There are some design guidelines that Michael and I have worked on dozens of design guidelines and objective standards across the state. And there are some design guidelines that just cannot be made quantifiable. They fundamentally need to change. When you're talking about the air of if you're familiar with architectural fluff is what I'll call it, the air of the building. Well, what is the air of the building? What is the sense of community a building gives? Subjective. It depends on who you're speaking with. Some of those things can't be made quantifiable, but you can attempt to do it through design elements that are measurable. So here, these are other examples within existing city documents that include subjective language. The term easily converted. Easy is different to different developers, different community members. What is easy? To the extent possible, beg. Very gray, leaves the door open. Subjective language as part of this guideline states that corner buildings should have distinct architectural features. Should leaves the door open to whether or not they have to include it. And what would that architectural feature be? In order to make that objective, you would need to state whether they are required to have an architectural feature or not, list the specific type of architectural features that are allowed, and then add quantifiable measurements of where those should be allowed, by what size, and in different locations. And then these are just additional examples in some of your specific plans that have design guideline components that are subjective. But as I had mentioned, when we're working through this, our plan is to basically evaluate all of your existing planning documents and extract design guidelines out of that are part of that. And working with your city staff, planning staff, to convert some of those in order to bring forward back to the Planning Commission for consideration for an objective standard. And that'll be part of future meetings moving forward, where the commission, all of you, will have the ability to provide feedback and react to a set of standards that are fundamentally based off successful implementation of design through past projects. And again, I think that's really important because we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here. San Ramon has several planning documents with extensive design guidelines that have proven successful. And so we don't necessarily want to toss that out. I think it's important to maintain those, but we need to work with the Planning Commission and City Council to determine when and where those are appropriate in an objective nature. It might not be appropriate citywide, and they wouldn't get carried forward from a design guideline to a standard, but that's the determination that we're going to work through this process. So I'm going to take a breather and hand it over to Michael, and he's going to walk through some of the draft objectives and design standards that were prepared in essence to reflect the implementation of the general plan and the housing element that relate to mixed use, just to give you a flavor of where this process, we're looking to take this process moving forward.
Evening. So last year, we worked with staff to develop some initial set of design standards. Those were looked at a combination of new standards and then also looked at your existing guidelines and hoping to come up with some new objective standards for mixed use specifically. So I'll preface that these are really geared towards mixed use, but mixed use oftentimes has a residential component to it. So a lot of these could be converted into residential standards or specifically commercial standards. So as Brent mentioned, we developed these standards to be consistent with both your general plan and your housing element. And what I'm hoping to do is just provide a general overview of the main takeaways in these standards. You have the standards in front of you. I would just like to kind of break down and provide that higher level overview. Really, what we've focused on, though, is site design, pedestrian access, location of parking structures, looking at building and massing form, and these common open spaces versus private open spaces. So one of our kind of first set of standards that we look at is site circulation, and that's really important. We are trying to encourage a pedestrian-friendly, pedestrian-oriented development in these mixed-use concepts. So ensuring that pedestrian flow is easy and is adequate and efficient is important. And so we have this graphic here, and this is just to provide you kind of a general idea of kind of what we're getting at. But the first step in that is determining where your locations are to a development or to a project. And what we're really trying to focus on is sticking the site entrances or your driveways on secondary streets and saving your primary streets, your arterials, your major streets for the pedestrian-oriented feel. Have your open spaces open up onto those areas that are already heavily trafficked. Another concept is to really locate the structure frontages along areas of pedestrian travel. So whether that be fronting open spaces, fronting sidewalks, really pushing the entrances out towards the pedestrian view, tucking in your parking structures or your parking spaces behind that pedestrian view and making it a really welcoming site for pedestrians. So in addition to this pedestrian, we're also looking at bicycle. And again, this already kind of spoke to it, but the location of the building frontages really plays a role in this. We've all seen the development where you have your sea of parking structure or your sea of parking in front of you, and then you have your development. And we know that that's not friendly for a pedestrian standpoint. So pushing your buildings up to the sidewalk, creating that activation and pushing those areas that are less desirable, like your parking areas in the back. Another concept that we're looking at when we look at pedestrian scale is the activation of ground floor uses. So an urban design kind of technique is creating this visual interest, if you will. And so we've all seen when we've been in a development and it's just a really long single plane on either side, it feels strange. It feels like you're restricted. And one of the ways that we can break that up is through articulating facades. And I think we saw that in the picture that we showed, and even the application that was discussed this evening, this moving back of floors, of structure planes, of structure heights. And that's really important. It does create that visual interest from a pedestrian standpoint. And then another aspect that was touched on this evening, and I think actually really bodes well, is the expansion of wider sidewalks. So there's a couple of reasons to do that. It's easier for pedestrian flow. You get multimodal. You can fit bicycles. You can fit strollers. It allows for families to move around conveniently, efficiently, not just families, but visitors to the sites, residents. Another aspect that we focused on for these design standards was the use of this public and common private open space. And we are proposing this idea of paseos and really linking paseos as these primary funnels of traffic for pedestrians and linking that to some sort of standard of the width of these paseos and ensuring that they're in line and consistent and make sense with the height of structures. And so we have here just an example where, as you see at the bottom, as the wider the path of the paseo is, the taller the structure is, or vice versa. The taller the structure, the wider you need to make those spaces. That's to make everything feel in scale. That's kind of good design. You don't want to make people feel pressured. We want it to be welcoming, open, while taking into consideration that these are multi-story structures and trying to design that structure in a way where it's not obtrusive. Open space is also a big consideration when we're looking at mixed use. We have that interplay between what is private open space, what is public open space, what is private public open space, right? When we're looking at private developments. And so we've taken that into consideration in these standards. Where are we locating your private open space for your residences, potentially in these mixed use structures? And what types of amenities is the city requiring, if any, passive, active amenities, and where those can be, ground floors, above floor. Everyone's favorite topic, parking. So touched on this earlier, the location of our parking facilities, whether those be structures or surface lots. Really, we don't want those to be the predominant view of development. We want those tucked back. We want to encourage that sense of pedestrian friendliness. So we would encourage the use of standalone parking structures if they were somehow screened, and then really incorporating multi-access points to the parking. We know that we're still a car dependent society, so we can't get rid of that, but we can try to at least increase the opportunity or the ease of those to travel not by car.
I think what's important here too is what Michael's showing have to do with parking design, not necessarily the parking ratio. Any project that comes in, for example, parking ratio is going to be evaluated against your zoning code and your municipal code and the different ratio requirements that are done by use. This is just the circulation of parking and how it interacts with the project site as well as surrounding properties.
It's actually a great point. So a lot of parking standards are already objective. Sorry, you have 1 space per 2 units, 1.5 space, whatever. So yeah, that isn't really what we're addressing. We're really looking at the design of those spaces and trying to do it objectively. And kind of the next I want to touch on is really the architecture, the design of these structures, and that's done through building form and massing. And we have the ability to control building form and massing through objective standards. Particularly for these mixed use standards, we've looked at balconies, the use of fenestration, our architectural articulation, different types of materials, that stepping back of various wall planes. And with that, really looking at what is, from those architectural elements, what is that, how would the pedestrians experience that? I touched on these wider sidewalks, and that was really done by design to create active frontages. We want these frontages to be, whether it's residential, commercial, to be used actively and creating opportunities for developers, property owners to do that. So allowing there to be some flex space in front of structures where you can have outdoor dining, or you could put up or conduct certain event spaces. And so we've addressed that through different plantings, different fenestrations, fences. Really, the idea is just to activate those frontages again. And really that plays, it's important. It's important consideration when we're looking at mixed use, because you do have those different uses in the same format and that same development. So creating something that's cohesive but also usable from a shopper standpoint versus from a resident standpoint is something that we have to take into consideration. So that is the high level overview. I'm sure you have some questions of some of the specific standards. So I would like to hand it back to the chair to see if you for answer questions, assist in some discussion, and provide any clarification if need be.
Okay, thank you. Let's do it this way. Do any of the commissioners have questions for our consultant? Commissioner Alpert will lead off.
So on the slide at the very beginning, you talked about why we have objective design standards, and it was relatively driven by a lot of goals and objectives, but they felt largely to support residential projects. Are you, or is the scope of this project, and maybe it's a question for Cindy, is it residential, commercial? Is it both? What is the scope of what we're building objective design standards around?
Well, I can default to Cindy and then I can add on if needed.
Yeah, so our primary goal is really addressing residential development. State law has dictated that specifically for those types of projects, we have a need to amend both the zoning ordinance as well as adopt design standards that address residential specifically. But, you know, certainly because we are updating the zoning ordinance at the same time, there's an opportunity if there's a need for clarification for some of the other sections of our ordinance. You know, we'll certainly take that feedback and make updates as necessary to make it, you know, clearer for everybody who's both designing projects and reviewing projects to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Totally makes sense. The next question, could you comment, you highlighted a whole bunch of places that are probably guidelines that aren't objective design standards that exist throughout all our documents. Is there still a role for guidelines in our official documents, design guidelines, suggestions, character, or are all those just taken out of the documentation?
Well, I can start and then default to city staff. I mean, guidelines are kind of going by the wayside. They're voluntary, they're not enforceable, but I still think guidelines have a place. When a project comes forward, let's say in a discretionary action, there still is the ability to create conditions based off of guidelines and expectations that the city has. But if a project is streamlining and is moving forward, meeting the state's new housing laws and legislation, the guidelines are a moot point. That's where the objective standards come in. That's where it's important to have that comprehensive set of objective standards in play. But I would say about 50% of the communities that we've been working with, guidelines are kind of going by the wayside and the objective standards are becoming the dominant force. But it depends on each jurisdiction.
Okay. Well, I would probably disagree with you. Well, I agree that standards are really critical. I would also say that if I'm a developer and I'm trying to decide what to build, being able to read and understand the guidelines that have existed by the city will get, before they've even started, they can say, this city encourages this, prefers this versus that when it's very early in the process. So I would hope that the decades that the city has put into developing guidelines aren't just shunned, because developers do get an appreciation of what the city builds by having guidelines. Now, I totally understand that if a developer wants to just play it tough and just follow whatever's an objective standard, then that has to, that's the ultimate rule. But I still think that guidelines probably have a role in our city character. You commented on past practices. What does it mean? What projects? So my question is, how far back are you going to be looking at projects that have been approved in the city, and how far back will you be looking at conditions of approval? Because what we've done in the last 12 months is different than we did in the last 12 years. So
Right.
how far is the examination going to be going?
And I still think that is to be determined, and we're coordinating with the planning staff right now on a time frame and how far back and what projects we pull. I think it's important to look at successful projects, but also look at projects that had some difficulty getting through, because that also opens a lens to what didn't work and what not to repeat.
Got it. Next question I have is I understand ultimately there will be an objective design standard document, and my question is, how does that play with existing plans that exist in the city? Does it supplement? Does it supplant? Does it replace? Do we retire the other documents? How do those all live together? And there's a order of precedence when we look through these documents, because when you create a new document, then the overlays an old document. How does this all play out, in this process?
It is complex. I'm going to let Cindy start with that, and then I'll jump in from there.
So what I've seen with other cities and the way that they typically adopt these is there's a general statement that the design guidelines or objective design and development standards start with, and it talks about the relationship of the design standards to what exists in other documents. So they're supposed to complement each other. If there are some specific development standards that exist in the zoning ordinance, that those standards are in place. These are to complement those, and you can set it up in a way where you identify the order of which documents you're looking at for design standards, and I'll tag Brent to see if he has anything else to add to what he thinks would help.
No, I
people.
mean, it's important at the beginning of objective design standards to explain the relationship not only between your general plan, your specific plans, whether they're standalone community plans, design guidelines, and objective standards. When a project comes forward, objective standards are going to run ahead as your first evaluator, but it's important to look at existing city plans to ensure consistency and complementary standards so that they don't conflict with other precedents as well. But the objective standards, that'll be the first line moving forward. And that's why it's important to evaluate all of your existing plans to make sure there is that compatibility is subjective. I'm still going to use the word, but make sure there is some compatibility between those and where we can pull some of those subjective guidelines for compatibility between the overall objective standards and your individual plans is important.
Okay, well, I was just, what occurred to me in preparing for the earlier discussion is I looked at the City Walk design guidelines, and there are certain statements in there that are very, very precise that I think would probably pass the objective design standards. There's a whole lot of that document that probably wouldn't under current definition, and I'm just curious, you know, we just adopted this within the last few years. Will it be, I assume we're not going to retire the document, but we will have a document that says that shall versus the should or encourage kind of stuff to, okay, that helps. Thank you. And then, and this was because of the slide that was up there. We know essentially mostly where housing is going to take place in the city over the next housing cycle because we passed the housing element. Is there a sense that we will prioritize those areas versus others? And what prompted that was the 3 or 4 examples were on the West Side specific plan, and the West Side specific plan is the one that always gets called out as being ready for retirement. So I just wanted to ask, how does the relationship between housing element, housing opportunity sites, and developing objective design standards play, if at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think our goal with the ODDS document, the odds document, is that it can be applicable throughout the city. So we're always going to be, unless a specific plan really dictates some very unique design elements that you'd like in it. And so our expectation is that until you retire a plan, if there's still design standards that are in that specific plan, those will take precedent over, you know, these citywide ones. But the intent of this document is to be able to provide some citywide design standards that are going to make sure that architecture is looked at in a way where you can have a higher quality through using design and development standards. And you'll want that higher quality throughout the city, not just in one particular area. And so our intent is not necessarily to focus specifically on housing opportunity sites, but that makes sure that these standards are going to be things that we want to apply throughout the city, like fronting, you know, buildings fronting streets and addressing pedestrian and circulation access. And so if there's something that's more specific and unique, we may need to, as we're going through specific plans, maybe adopt something specific and unique to those areas and revisit that, you know, as part of this effort too.
That makes sense. That makes sense. That is it for my questions. I do have some suggestions on the process, but after we get back.
Okay, thanks. Any of the other commissioners? Commissioner Curtis? Commissioner Ahmed?
There will be, I'll need to defer to staff if on the final use of the document, whether it was codification or resolution anticipated.
Our goal is to adopt the standards and not codify them in the Muni Code so that it gives us the ability to update as necessary. But the zoning ordinance will have to be updated concurrently, and those will be codified in the Muni Code. So, you know, those typical development standards that talk about density, minimum parking requirements, height restrictions, daylight planes, those types of requirements will be codified in the zoning ordinance and will be adopted by ordinance. Right.
How are you going to reconcile that?
So your general plan typically is going to be a high level language that may not always seem objective other than things like density ranges and density ranges and floor area ratios. You'll typically find that very specific in the general plan. But the zoning ordinance is really the document that implements the general plan, the guidance that the general plan provides. And so the zoning ordinance is really what implements that. So if the general plan talks about wanting to make sure that, you know, there's an abundance of open space and that we encourage, you know, a relationship of pedestrians and vehicular, you know, connectivity in a project, your zoning ordinance will specify that relationship to the street and that what the specific circulation is. So how many driveway access points you might have, and how many parking spaces you will have to facilitate pedestrian and bicycle, you know, relationship. And then your objective design standards will actually dictate, you know, we want that parking structure either in the back of the you know, back of a site or accessible, you know, in a particular design standard. So that's kind of the relationship that your general plan will still have some general guiding, you know, language. We call them guiding policies and implementation policies. But the zoning ordinance and the specific plans and the objective design standards are what really implements some of that subjective and high level language that you find in the general plan. Yeah.
So I would like to ask the question this way. First of all, I really like how you showed us the differentiation of the walkway depending on the height of the building. You know, I think that is a clear example of those being, you know, objective and understandable. But I'm going to ask you to, if you can go back to, well, it's the packet where you have this picture, sorry. And if you could just, I know I'm putting you on the spot. So the first picture says an example of multi-family development without articulation, massing, and expansive. And then one below says it is. Can you offer, off the top of your head, what the design standard might read for specifying articulation or specifying massing? We see the results, but if I had come in, what would I have read to distinguish building we don't like to building we do like?
So a really common one is the articulation of your wall plane. And a lot of the times that's done with it's a distance trigger. So as a hypothetical, every 50 feet, there has to be some articulation in the wall plane, whether that be jutting out into the sidewalk or pushing back into the property. And so we could have a standard that any wall plane greater than 50 feet or every wall plane that has to have some articulation, 5 feet in articulation every 50 feet. So that could be a standard, or we could even look at articulation from glazing, or like windows. So we could talk about windows, and if we really wanted to, I'm not, that wouldn't suggest it. It's very specific, but you could get into how far your windows are set into your wall plan. You can kind of craft articulation that way. I would recommend that would really be, that decision should really be for the designers. But we can set really those big massing, back up, windows and the determination of how those should be designed. I think those might be too specific for this, for ODDS. The physical layout of the structure is something that we can do.
So as we get much more specific then, at what point are we creating just a whole lot of cookie cutter facilities? I mean, they're like, okay, this thing and this thing, when it seems like the intent is to actually avoid all that. Looking at your two examples here.
Well, I think part of that is the balance. I think it's the balance of how into the weeds do the objective standards go. There are lots of examples of jurisdictions in California that have done different variations of objective standards. Some of them have gone as detailed as the width of mullions within your window, down to the variation color scale that is on a building, down to the shape of stone on the front. That is not flexible. Every building is going to look the same.
Right.
Part of creating that balance is providing that 30,000 foot level view of starting to dictate some of the massing, but not getting into some of those more specific different criteria. Like I had listed in that list in the beginning that include color or sometimes materials. You can designate that as you move up in stories on a building that the material must change or shall change between the first and second floors and the third up. But you don't necessarily have to dictate that the third level has to be slatted wood 1/4 inch thick and so forth. But you can, because that is objective. But it's striking that balance of providing flexibility and certainty within a standard. It's a common question we get of, aren't all projects going to look identical? Depending how far objective standards go, there is the potential. But I think as part of this, what we try to strike is allowing the expectations of a well-designed site, a well-structured building that is compatible and adapts with its location, but still giving the designer some leeway in presenting a project that is unique and does reflect where the community is looking to head.
Okay.
Well, it's a study session so that it's not required. However, if there is someone dying to speak, I'll open it up for the public comment. I mean, do we have someone?
We have a speaker card.
We have a speaker card. I'm guessing who that is. Why don't you come on down? Someone who stayed through this hearing at this point, I think they deserve to come down and have their 3 minutes.
Hey, Susie Ferris-Indercom.
Thank you. Again, I'm pretty sure you know who I am and probably what I'm representing. I want to just make it clear that the discussion of objective standards as laid out so far does not include any consideration of mixed use. The General Plan Policy 4.6-1-25, which directs establishment of objective standards for mixed use. The city needs to have a means of determining whether the mix of use is sufficient, integrated, and vital, and also addresses related concerns pertaining to retail. It's not appropriate that this topic is entirely ignored when the general plan requires establishment of these standards. And I've kind of gathered from this that this is going to be a multi-phase thing, but it really troubles me that that's missing so far. If you plan to hold a discussion of the actual substance of standards, one thing to keep in mind is that a standard can grant the applicant discretion and still remain objective. Using the master plan example, a standard could say that the developer must establish a master plan encumbering the project that discusses the following X elements, but that the applicant has discretion to formulate those elements so it is an objective from the standpoint of the decision maker. Another example from a housing and community development publication would be requiring porches with columns. Whether there are columns or not is objective. Then it would be up to the applicant to decide the shape, size, number, and color. I just want to urge the commission and staff to get this effort right in order to protect the city's retail capacity and prevent poorly conceived mixed-use development efforts from ever going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other speaker cards, but we did receive written communication from everyone for East Bay.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any more? Come on down, guys. Okay, I had a couple of really simple questions. The first is, are there any cities in the Tri-Valley that have adopted objective design and development standards?
Yes.
Who would those be?
The city of Walnut Creek, city of Concord, city of Pleasant Hill, Pleasanton. And I believe Livermore went through the process, but I'm not sure if it was fully completed.
Okay, all right, so in case we're, have nothing to do, before the Super Bowl starts, where would we find those objective design standards, say for Pleasanton, which is in the Tri-Valley?
They would be on the city's planning website.
Okay,
And each of those cities took different approaches. Some of the standards are codified. Some of them are adopted by resolution, mainly to allow flexibility. And this is what staff was talking about, is some communities view this as the first step. Think of it as your first dip your toe in the water, knowing that there's probably going to be some modifications as developments come through. You kind of learn some growing pains, and that's the reason for a resolution. Some communities kept their design guidelines and had a set of comparable objective standards with them. So there was a side-by-side comparison that still relays what the expectations are. So there's lots of different formats out there. And so I would recommend really taking a look at those.
okay, the reason I asked is because what you've given us is an introductory outline as opposed to getting down into the weeds at all. And I think that some of us, me included, would like to have some specifics to look at and say, okay, this is an objective guideline. Here's how it would deal with what you talked about, which is articulation of buildings. It's one thing to talk about objective standards, but it's a lot different to see them in black and white in print. It says every 50 feet, you have to either have a setback or a pullout of not less than 3 feet, something like that. You can see what we're looking at. Then you can visualize what that is going to look like in practice, because as you, I think, have pointed out, the purpose of the design, the objective standards, as well as, you know, creating something we can stick people with, is to have something that meets our standards without having a totally subjective view. I mean, it used to be, you know, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it, and you know what I'm talking about. But this is a way of saying, here's how we're going to get where we're going to make it specific enough, but to have some flexibility. And that's where the objective standpoint comes in. 3 feet is one thing, not to exceed 3 feet, or not to be more than 3 or 5 feet. Well, you have an objective standard, you've created a parameter, but it's an objective parameter that gives some flexibility to the person who's trying to build something to say, well, in this particular location, 3 feet's a little bit too much this way, 5, let's do it 4 3/4. So, okay, but it would be helpful, at least to me, and I'll go try and find that to see what these things look like in the real world.
If I may add
Sure.
too, based on public comment, this process does include mixed use. So the state has clarified through new state legislation that there's mixed use projects that include multifamily do fall under objective standards, criteria that have to be met. The slides that Michael went over this evening, those are mixed use, and those are just the beginning. we are working with staff to look at the ratio of the interaction between non-residential uses and residential uses, and how those commonalities work together. And flexibility is important too. I'd mentioned this in the presentation. It's striking that balance between being objective but not overly prescriptive, to where everything turns out to be the same box and look the same color. And part of that, the public comment had a great example when it came to columns. You can require columns, but you don't need to say they're Grecian.
Mhm.
You can just say that, the front porch, a front stoop shall provide columns. Leave it up to the designer to put the columns in and match the uniqueness of a development. And that's that balance that's hard to strike,
Right.
but it can be done.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, but I think Commissioner Alpert had some comments, so we'll open up for commissioner discussion.
So first of all, I see this as a really big effort, not insignificant at all. And my ask is that we bite it off sort of one bite at a time, as opposed to not seeing y'all for 18 months or 9 months or something, and then get dumped on us with 72 hours to digest design guidelines that will probably, what I'm getting, pull pieces from probably a dozen documents across the city, whether it's specific plans, master plans, walking district guidelines, all that. So my ask of staff, I guess, really, is that if we can get it in smaller pieces, and even though I know it causes more work to have more public hearings, I just see easily just this here tonight can become really quickly overwhelming, at least for me on this. So that's my ask. And then when I would also suggest, and I've not really thought this completely, is maybe we could actually do almost a prototype of a small segment to get us sort of trained on how to do this, and that would be, and I don't know how you're going to break it apart. Are you going to work on a subject area or a geographic area? Today we're going to work on articulation. Here's some standards on articulation for y'all to kind of digest and provide comment on. I think that would be, for me personally, I would like to feel like I know what I'm doing and not be faced with hundreds of pages on a Friday night to try and provide smart comments on a Tuesday. So to the extent possible, as you're starting to break this up, if you can sort of break it up into smaller parts, that would be really helpful. And then the other thought I had was, and if I'm trying to visualize or imagine the process that you're going to be going through, you'll start by digesting all the documents. Everywhere there's a should or could or oughta, you're going to try and think about, does that belong as an objective design standard, and then kind of objectify it into the new document. And I'm not sure if it's going to be helpful or not, but to the extent possible, if when we get these, if there's a reference back to the source that kind of said, hey, we saw should do this, and these 4 documents, we think it's worthy of an objective design standard. But if you can kind of cite your references a little bit, that might help us be more efficient and effective when we do actually get to the document review itself. Just a thought, and then I think the San Ramon Village Specific Plan we've kind of held up as a good example that has a lot of objective design standards, and I think that's still probably true. There's design guidelines and objective design standards. There's really more. I think that's still true, right, Cindy? That document, we spent a lot of time on this and we were thinking about that.
Yeah, that document, and it's broken down by zoning designation, and then all the different categories associated with design guidelines that are in kind of a table format for each of those zones. And then we have our separate design guidelines that are in a separate chapter of that document. And some of the examples that were brought up, those can still be applied to our commercial areas. And so when they're written, it may not be specific to residential, but some of those design guidelines would still be things that we would want to continue to maintain in the specific plan, because we can use those for the commercial areas.
Okay, just was confirming that this is still a good document.
Yeah.
I thought it was. Okay. Those are my suggestions on it. Just process a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Albert. Do the other commissioners have any comments before we let these guys go home? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is item 12.3, which is the formation of an ad hoc committee for TAC interviews. I'm the liaison to TAC, so I will volunteer to be one of the two interviewers. So what I need is another body to join me. All right, Commissioner Alpert volunteered. So let the record reflect that Commissioner Alpert and I will do the TAC interviews. Okay, and Commissioner, no, it's not Commissioner. Do any of the commissioners have any reports on committee meetings they attended to they want to advise us of? See the
I do.
head shaking left to right?
I-
Oh,
Oh,
I have
so-
one up and
So,
down.
yes, thank you. I have notes from the two Parks Commission meetings that they have faithfully met despite our hiatus. And so the first one was in December. And the essence that I want to bring back to us is that they had a nice presentation in the new business about the Discover San Ramon program. And this is what used to be part of the, Visitors Convention Bureau kind of business. And the idea is, how do we increase the number of people staying in our hotels? And that really the biggest challenge isn't so much the city, but the challenge is that hotel management and hotel ownership changes apparently quite frequently. And so there's this lack of continuity in getting a program established. So that when this was presented to the Parks and Community Services Commission, it's the idea of, how do we create events that bring more people to the city? And how do we market ourselves so that people will want to stay here? And it's a fine line between having interesting events, like mentioned was a dog show here, but then the dog owners don't stay in our hotels. They go somewhere else where the hotel rates are more affordable. So it's a balance between having events that people will be brought in large numbers, who are also of the demographic who will then stay in our hotels. The wedding business is a good example. So if you know people getting married soon, think of San Ramon. So it was a really interesting presentation. An update on the art pieces in the Bartlett Pear Park. They had to modify their art pieces. And then finally, in this month's meeting, the big takeaway was they reviewed the fee schedule for the parks use and so forth. But what they are adding new is a fee for the tennis courts. Previously, the tennis courts have not been generating income, despite the difference between the pools and the gyms and so forth, and the fields. So they have agreed to add a fee for using tennis courts and subsequently pickleball. So those will be reservation-based and a fee-based use for the city. And that is the report.
Thank you. If there are no other liaison reports, Mr. Barr, would you tell us what we'll be doing in the future?
Okay, on the 20th, we have a presentation by the city manager's office on city finances. And we're actually still tinkering with a couple of other potential items for that meeting. In addition, on March 5th, we'll have the general plan annual report on consent, and then the zoning ordinance study session is scheduled for the 5th as well.
Lauren, you previously told us that we can look at the cap real soon. Do you have are you allowed to share what you think the future looks like for that?
It's sort of a big question mark right now. I don't know if the commission's aware that the council has opted to create a body to provide some guidance on the cap development, and they will be recruiting applicants to serve on that committee. And so we're basically on hold until such time as we have a committee formed that we can start to vet ideas with, that will ultimately recommend to the planning commission, which then recommends to city council. So it'll be later this year.
All right, unless anybody else has some hot news they want to mention, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.